If you wondered if I bought this top so that I could feel like I was in the Regency, the answer would be yes. I know that it's not at all, but I saw it and I was like, I can pretend. I can pretend that, or that I'm a shepherdess in Marie Antoinette's court. Today I'm going to talk about Jane Austen July, one of the highlights of every year for me, that and October. So I love classic books. It's my favorite thing to read, my favorite thing to talk about and enjoy. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the Jane Austen books that I'm going to read, the adaptations, retelling, the contemporary authors to her, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about other books that I plan to read in July. In June, I read both Sensibility and Persuasion. And Persuasion is my most read of Jane Austen's book. This was the fourth time reading it. I really, really like it. And Sensibility, this was my second time. I read it for the first time in 2022. It was the last of the books of Jane Austen that I read, and I really liked it at the time, but I wasn't sure how it stacked up next to other books. I want to be in the right mood, but I'm also like, I've never read all of them close together. So I feel like it would be really cool to read them in a month or so to really be able to compare. So I got a head start on that. But the book that I'm going to read next for Jane Austen's complete works is Mansfield Park. This is also a book that I've only read once. I read it over the summer of 2021, and I really, really liked it. I know that this is kind of a controversial thought. A lot of people don't like it as much. I loved it. I read it all physically, and it took me a really long time. I am a very slow dyslexic reader, but I really, really enjoyed annotating like every thought and feeling and just sitting it. And I would say that until about here, I was like, maybe this is my favorite Jane Austen book. And then the last 80 pages happened. I like Fanny a lot. I relate to Fanny a lot. I like Henry a lot. He is great. The other characters, even like the Bertrams, they're such messy characters, and they're characters that have just a lot of issues, but I love them. And I think that there's a lot of love even mixed with a lot of like abuse and hurt and all those other things. So yeah, I'm really excited to listen to this audio. The second prompt is to read a book that is not one of her main 6 novels. And also this year, there's a read-along for both the Watsons and Sanditon. And last year I read almost all of the Watsons. I think that I only have half a page left. I read most of it and I like vlogged it, and then something happened in my life. I don't even remember, but it interrupted it, and I was like always waiting. So I think I literally have part of a page left, which is just really sad. But I love this. It's a partial story. It's the beginning of a story, but I really enjoyed these narrations, these stories, and kind of thinking about where it is. And then Sanditon is her last novel. So The Watsons was abandoned, I think, in 1805. The Sanditon was the last book, and she died before she could finish it. So I've not read that at all. I'm definitely going to finish The Watsons, but I don't know if I'll read Sanditon. I do feel kind of covetous over the rest of Jane Austen's books. Like, I loved reading Mansfield Park for the first time by itself, and like I have Lady Susan up there. I'm like, oh, when I finish my last Jane Austen book, I can't reread more of hers. And I want to read her Juvenilia, and I read some of it as well, but like, you know, I want to read her full novels or like fuller pieces for the first time. So I don't know. Will I read all of them? Do I want to rush, or do I want to sit a little bit more? It's hard to tell. From here, I'm going to talk a lot about retellings of Jane Austen's or books that are historically set at the same time. So there's a lot of them. Am I going to read all of them? No, but I'm going to talk about some of them so that you can kind of understand where my heart is and where my head is. So in no particular order, we have A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin. And then the second book in that series is A Lady's Guide to Scandal, which is the one that really intrigued me. I had both of these kind of on my radar, but this feels like it's going to be a little bit of a Persuasion second chance romance maybe, or at least it's a widowed woman getting back on the market, which seems really interesting. We have Lady Charlotte Gets Her Man. I actually don't know that much about it, but I love the cover. And then we have Queen of Exiles by Vanessa Riley. She's been on my radar for a while. She has written several other books, but this is a book that's set at the same time, but it's set in Haiti in 1810. And it's about a woman named Marie Louise who became the first queen of Haiti, and her story, which just seemed really interesting and like a point of view that is not often represented in the Regency. And then we have Reputation by Lex Croucher. We have Emma of 83rd Street. This is a modern retelling of Emma, which is my favorite Jane Austen book. And then we have Once Persuaded, Twice Shy by Melodie Edwards. This is interesting to me because it is Persuasion, and I'm not necessarily sure that this book looks like it's good, which is a little bit judgmental of mine, but it's set in Niagara, and I'm Canadian. Niagara is like an hour and a bit from me, like Niagara Falls, and I think that would be really cool. I've never read a book set in there, and I love it. So yes, we have the Jane Austen Society, and this is a book that I recently acquired from a friend, so I'm really excited. I know that this is a book, I think that it's set more in the 1900s, and it has people reading Jane Austen, talking about it, which sounds awesome. Along those lines, we have the Jane Austen Book Club, and I have gone back and forth. I was not going to read this book for a long time because I read the movie, and it was bad. But the author Karen Joy Fowler, is the author of Booth, which I read a few years ago and I loved. It was so emotional and so well written, and it talks about the Wilkes family during the time of the Civil War and leading up to it, and kind of talks about how most people in that family were very anti-slavery and all of those things, but you have this one young boy who is very radicalized and then obviously kills Abraham Lincoln. So it's really good. A lot of people didn't like it, and I adored it. I had so many feelings about that book. So it's the same author. It's also a book from 20 years ago, so maybe she's improved as a writer, but she's also in her 60s or 70s, so she was an established writer at the same time. So will I give it a try? Have any of you read this book? I would love to hear your thoughts. And then a book that just made my list after I watched Katie's TBR is Mrs. Wickham by Sarah Page. And this is a retelling from the point of view of the woman who becomes Mrs. Wickham. And I love this. I really like this character, and I think that she's often misrepresented. And I have a lot of thoughts, and I have written my own thoughts in a version of this before. So I'm very interested to see her point of view. So then from there, I'm going to move on to nonfiction. I really, really enjoyed reading Lucy Worsley's biography last year. And yeah, I don't know if I'll read nonfiction this year or not, but my options are The Regency Years, which looks at Jane Austen, Napoleon, Byron, like all of the worlds, and seems really interesting. Jane Austen's Table is a cookbook that I looked at last year, and I don't think I'm going to read it cover to cover, but I might make a recipe from here in a vlog, which is really fun. I love to cook, and I used to work as a cook, so I think it would be really fun to make a food. And then we also have Jane Austen's A Life in Small Things by Paula Byrne. I really want to read her other book, which is like Jane Austen in Hollywood. Katie again talks a lot about this and the way that it made her rethink of Sense and Sensibility and the way that it's been adapted, and I think that would be really cool. It's not accessible in Canada. I've tried, I've looked, and I can't even like request it from my library, which really sucks. Then if we talk about Jane Austen's contemporaries, we have Evelina by Frances Burney. So this is a book that I think she loved, and it was partly inspiring to her and is also mentioned in Northanger Abbey. She's a little big, but I would like to read her. But I found her in a secondhand bookstore a few years ago, and I was like, I need this book. So I have been sleeping on it for way too long. I heard that other book. Other books that I was really excited to find back in the day and have not read is A School of Scandal. This was on my TBR from last year. This I first learned about in the Noble Blood episode I talked about last year. I had a video talking about Jane Austen podcasts, both ones that are specifically about Jane Austen as well as ones that cover the Regency era. I found out about this play from that podcast, which was so cool to learn and to find out. And this is about scandal, and it's based on real people. And I found an audiobook version of it through Libra FM, and I will leave that below. I really like listening to audiobooks of plays and reading a lot. I just read Hedda Gabler that way. So yeah, it's just so wonderful to do. So I think it will be easier. I find plays harder to read just by myself physically. So yeah, really excited. I also may read The Rivals by the same author. So yeah, that one is set in Bath, which I'm a big fan of Bath. Everything I read in Bath, really like. And then another author that was a steal to find was Maria Edgeworth's Castle Rackrent. And this is so exciting. It's very short. It's about an Irish castle. It's the first regional novel in English. And yeah, I believe it was published in like 1802 or something. So very much during Jane Austen's time, and I would love to read it. And I believe this is an author she also read, if I'm correct. And then an audiobook that I found that I think would just be really delightful to read is Regency Etiquette by a Lady of Distinction. And this was published anonymously in 1810, which sounds wonderful. I am obsessed with all of the things about the manners, etc. And I feel like this would be really cool to read. And then last, but certainly not least, we have the poet himself, William Wordsworth. And yeah, he was very famous during this era. He was around the lakes and all of that. So Taylor Swift, you know where you got your inspiration from. I also really appreciated the way that it was incorporated in Mary Bennet's story in The Other Bennet Sister, and that made me really excited. This is a very long book of all of his poems. I will obviously not be reading this probably 800-page, 752-page collection of poems this week. But yeah, I am really excited to go through some of them and read them. And yeah, I've never read his work, and it is really hit or miss with poets. I love certain poets and I don't like other poets. So yeah, I'm excited. And this is just a really beautiful illustration. I like it a lot. I'm going to really quickly talk about the things that I may watch, and then I'm going to talk about the books that are non-related to Jane Austen July. So I definitely want to watch the Sense and Sensibility of 2008 version. I started this a few years ago, and then I got distracted and never finished it because it's 4 episodes. I think I watched the first episode and a half. I liked it a lot, and it is one of the fan favorites of the adaptation, so I definitely have always meant to go back to it. And even when you've started something and then you have a hard time finishing it, that's the story of my life. And then I think that I want to rewatch the Emma 2020 and Persuasion 2022. One is critically loved, one is more critically panned. Both of them I did not like. I'm very particular with adaptations, and I tend to actually avoid most adaptations. I've never watched an adaptation of Northanger Abbey or Persuade. I guess I have rather one Persuasion, but like for a long time I had not watched any adaptations. I really, really love the Emma 2008, and yeah, I grew up with the Pride and Prejudice 2005, so I'm biased in that way. But yeah, many of the others, Northanger Abbey, Persuasion, and Mansfield Park, I did watch that adaptation, and I had regrets about watching it. So yes, many things. I keep on joking myself because I have watched more than the average thing. I know that I have feelings about Emma 2020, and I know that it is loved. Emma is my favorite, so I have a lot of feelings about how she should be represented. So I want to give it another chance. And then, do I think that Persuasion 2022 is probably the best? No, but should I give it another chance? I watched it with my friend and heckled it, and I think I made her time awful. So I should redeem myself and be more mature. And then I think I've heard that the other Persuasion ones are not bad. I think I may watch those. So if you know, I think there's a 2008 and then a 2000, like 90s one as well. So if you'd love to give me your thoughts on which Persuasion adaptation I should watch as well, I would love that. And then this July would not be complete without reading The Trouble with Mrs Montgomery Hurst by Katie Lumsden herself. And I'm so excited. I just ordered it from the UK. It's probably not going to be here until the very end, and it is a fairly long book because it publishes July 18th and then it has to ship to Canada, so all of those things. But I'm really excited. I'm visiting my family at the end of July into August, and I'm definitely going to be bringing it with me and reading it in the middle of nowhere, which is where my family lives. So I feel like that will be really great. And yeah, this is all about gossip and the way that time travels. It's set in the 1840s, and yeah, everyone wants to marry Mr. Montgomery Hurst, and then he marries a woman who already has kids and is widowed and all of these things. I'm a really big fan of the way that Jane Austen and Dickens and Gaskell and all the authors that she kind of was inspired by, that they deal with gossip and like a full collective story. I really, really enjoyed her first novel, but I love a big ensemble cast. So super, super psyched for this. And because I don't have enough novels already on here, I want to read Tempest Toast by Robertson Davies. This is a book that I've been wanting to read since the beginning of the year. It deals with a small town in Ontario putting on Shakespeare, and it sounds great. I have had such a great time reading Shakespeare adjacent novels this year. I read Exit Ghost as well as If We Were Villains, both incredible, both made me like remember how much I love Shakespeare, which I don't need to be remembered how much I like Shakespeare because I like him a lot, but you know, it was great. And then I finally want to read All's Well by Mona Atwood. This has been out from the library so many times, it's embarrassing. I think I psych myself out about it because I'm like, she's Canadian, she's awesome, she's like all the things. Like she literally spoke at Stratford Festival last year, and I was just like, oh. Anyways, and it also deals with chronic pain, which is something that I have, so really psyched. I think that I put Jane Austen and Shakespeare together because they're both awesome, as well as the fact that I often go to Stratford during July, so it's just really wonderful. And then when I'm on my classics mood, I would also love to finish Emily of New Moon. I started it a few months ago. I'm really enjoying it. And yeah, I feel like it would just fit. I love Lucy Montgomery. She's one of my favorite authors. This tells the story of a young, newly orphaned Emily as she goes and lives with relatives and experiences things then. If you're a fan of Anne of Green Gables, same author. I have so many other books that I will read this month, but the last book that I want to give a shout out to is Divine Might by Natalie Haynes. I love this author so much. She wrote a book that I absolutely loved in Stoneblind, which takes Medusa's story as well as those around her and just illustrates the story of tragedy and the way that stories are told, and it's just impeccable. And also it retells it in slightly different ways, which I just really liked it. And the writing and the humor, just impeccable. And then she also dives into nonfiction, and she wrote Pandora's Jar, which is a chronicling of the women in Greek mythology and how they're represented throughout time and how things have changed. And then Divine Might is doing that for the goddesses. So she's going to go through the pantheon and talk about the ways that they're represented over time. I am so psyched for this. So this is my very, very long July TBR. I would love to know which books you're reading, which books you recommend. I love Jane Austen July. It's so fun. So if you have not given it a chance before, I really, really recommend diving in and enjoying the time.